In this video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 worst Pharaoh's Servant cards to be released. If you haven't done so already, make sure to like and subscribe if you would like to see future videos. So number 10 on this list goes to Reign of Mercy. Reign of Mercy is a normal spell card that says increase the life points of both players by 1000 points. Technically speaking, this card is pretty useless, because in most situations it doesn't really matter if both you and your opponent have 8000 life points or if both you and your opponent have 9000 life points. Because it actually is the same thing, because in the end both you and your opponent are still the same distance away from 0 life points. However, despite how near useless this card actually is, there is one bit of saving grace. This card can be used effectively with cards like Battle Reaction to Samochi, because cards with this effect will actually make your opponent take that damage instead of them healing that damage. Still though, this is not one of the best cards to use in those types of decks, as there's much better cards such as Gift Card to use in those types of decks. Regardless though, because it does have some use with a searching kind of deck, it made me feel not really to put this card very high up on the list, but instead it gets to number 10 on this list. Number 9 on this list goes to Science Soldier. Science Soldier is a basic vanilla monster with only 800 attack and defense, no effect. When compared to all the other monsters here in this set, Science Soldier is actually the worst. There's a few other cards that actually come pretty close, such as Souls of the Forgotten, Takuro Yaiba, or Dark Bat, but not as bad as Science Soldier. As you can still see, a lot of these earlier sets still produce really shitty vanilla monsters, but eventually they of course stop, but it will still kind of be a while until we get past that phase. Number 8 on this list goes to Gift of the Mystical Elf. This is a normal trap card that says increase your life points by 300 points for each monster on the field. So technically speaking, the potential of this card in terms of life point healing is actually pretty massive. If there's 5 monsters on each side of the field, that's actually 3000 life points. Or if you're playing in Master Rule 4 with those extra monster zones, that's an additional 600 for 3600 in total. However, the truth is, in reality, how often is that actually going to happen? In many cases, the potential of this card is really just going to peak at around maybe up to 1500, but that's still kind of generous, maybe even less. On top of that, it's also a trap card, which means that if you compare this to cards such as Dying Keto the Cure Master, there would have to be at least 4 monsters on the field for this card to actually be better than that, because that 3 monsters is at 900, which still makes Dying Keto better, and that's a spell card, not a trap card. So it actually takes a lot just for this card to already beat a pretty bad card in Dying Keto the Cure Master. So because of that, this card gets the number 8 spot on this list. The number 7 spot goes to Numinous Healer. This one is another life point healing card, but it's more specific in terms of when you can activate it. Essentially, it says that you can activate this card when you take damage to your life points, which implies either by battle or effect damage. And when you do, you get to increase your life points by 1000 points, which, you know, that's actually okay, right? And also, you get to increase your life points by another 500 for each Numinous Healer card in your graveyard. So if there's 2 Numinous Healers in your graveyard, you're going to be gaining 2000 points. But once again, you can only activate this card when you take damage. Because of the dependence of additional Numinous Healers being in the graveyard, in addition to when you can actually activate this card as opposed to whenever you want, like Gift of the Mystical Elf, this card is actually technically worse than that card. If we take a situation like, let's say your opponent Mystical Space Typhoons your face down Gift of the Mystical Elf, you can just activate the card in response and gain your life points. Numinous Healer though, you're stuck. If your opponent targets it and blind MSTs it, you can't activate it, which makes this card objectively worse. The fact that this card is a trap card and it has very specific limitations on when you can activate it, but it still only gives you 1000 points of life points, it's just much worse than Dying Keto the Cure Master and Gift of the Mystical Elf. Oh, and also, there's a life point damage dealing equivalent card known as Attack and Receive, which basically inflicts 700 points of damage to your opponent's life points, in addition to 300 more for each copy of this card in the graveyard. But because inflicting life point damage is actually objectively better than gaining your own life points, that's why Numinous Healer is on this list and not Attack and Receive. The number 6 spot goes to Solomon's Lawbook. Solomon's Lawbook is another normal trap card that says skip your own standby phase. It's a very simple sentence, in fact a little too simple, and because of that it's really not useful in almost any situation. Now there are actually a few useful situations, such as when you're using Imperial Order or Messenger of Peace or the Regulation of Tribe, essentially cards that have a maintenance cost on the standby phase. So if you skip your own, then you skip the maintenance costs. However, situations like this are incredibly rare and in most cases not really worth using this card just to skip a maintenance cost. Because of that, that's why this card really finds itself on this list, because it's just not very practical. The number 5 spot in this list is actually tied among 4 cards, all of which have really similar effects, but out of these 4 I think the worst is Metal Detector. Metal Detector says you can activate it when a continuous trap card is activated, and after you activate this card, negate all continuous trap cards during the turn this card is activated, meaning until the end phase. There are 3 other similar cards like I mentioned before, and these are Armored Glass for equip cards, World Suppression for field spell cards, and Mystic Probe for continuous spell cards. When it comes to these 4 types of cards, generally speaking, continuous trap cards seem to usually be the least likely played, although it can still be quite debatable. From these 4, I would say World Suppression is the most useful, not that you would ever still use it, all 4 are honestly really bad. But regardless though, these cards have a very specific activation condition, and once they're activated they only negate all cards of that type for the remainder of the turn. They don't even destroy the cards, they just negate until the end phase, and that's it. These cards are just good definitions of very underpowered cards in terms of activating and what they actually do, that they honestly just had to be on this list. The number 4 on this list goes to Thousand Eyes Idol. Thousand Eyes Idol is a dark level 1 spellcaster with 0 attack and defense. Horrible stats, and so that makes it the worst vanilla of this set. Now yes, this card is actually material for Thousand Eyes Restrict when combining with Relinquish with Polymerization. However, despite the huge amount of use from Thousand Eyes Restrict, nobody ever brought out that card by using Polymerization with Relinquish. It was just not a thing. People would constantly find other ways to bring Thousand Eyes Restrict, such as Instant Fusion or other ways as well, which means this card was forgotten really as early as it came out back in Pharaoh's Servant. And because of its garbage stats and near useless capabilities, that's essentially why this card gets the number 4 on this list. The number 3 on this list goes to Spikebot. Spikebot is another one of those tribute vanilla monsters with really bad stats like a level 4. This one here is no exception. It's a level 5 machine with 1800 attack and 1700 defense. By this point there were already plenty of level 4 or lower monsters with 1800 attack, such as back then called Harpy's brother, now Sky Scout, or 7 colored fish, Lajin the Mystical Genie, and so on and so forth. That makes this card severely underpowered and the worst tribute monster in this set. There are other monsters that came pretty close, such as Flame Champion, but that one has 100 more attacks, so I couldn't include that here and instead Spikebot. In addition, there's also cards with worse stats than Spikebot, such as Invitation to a Dark Sleep, but that one at least has an effect that, although it's not very good, it at least helps a little bit, so I couldn't make that card be worse than Spikebot. Spikebot is just the worst one in the set when it comes to a level 5 or 6 tribute monster. And so that's why this card gets the number 3 on this list. Number 2 on this list goes to a complete tie between 2 cards, Gust and Driving Snow. Both of these are normal trap cards that may only be activated when one or more of your specific kind of cards gets destroyed by an opponent's card effect. Essentially for Gust, one or more of your spell cards must be destroyed by your opponent's card effect, and for Driving Snow, one or more of your trap cards must be destroyed by your opponent's card effect. And once that happens, these 2 cards have the same effect. Destroy one spell or trap on the field. So it's a very specific activation condition, and even more specifically, it must be by your opponent. You can't even abuse this effect by using your own cards to destroy these. Not that you would want to anyway, as that's also going to make you go minus eventually, which is also a problem. In addition, there were already cards that were better than these when they came out, such as Dust Tornado or obviously Mystical Space Typhoon being the best of the best back in the day. And so because of that, these cards were just significantly underpowered with really bad activation conditions and really mediocre effects for what they do in these specific activation conditions. And that's why these cards get the number 2 on this list. And lastly, the number 1 spot for the worst Pharaoh's Servant card ever is Gamble. Gamble is another normal trap card that says that you can only activate this card when your opponent's hand is 6 or more and your hand is 2 or less. After that, You toss a coin and you call heads or tails, and if you call it right, you get to draw cards until you have 5 cards. But if you call it wrong, you skip your next turn. Your entire next turn. Despite what the name might suggest that this is like the gamble card, I've never seen a gamble card be this bad. I mean, okay, maybe there are some really bad ones, but this is by far one of the worst gamble cards, not just one of the worst Pharaoh's Servant cards, for several reasons. For one, the activation condition is so specific. Your opponent must have 6 or more, while you have 2 or less. First of all, that's never gonna happen, or almost never at least. And if it does happen, the effect has to be absolutely amazing because the rarity of this situation is already way too low. But instead, they made it a coin toss, so once you fulfill this very specific criteria for activating the card, you then have a 50% chance to draw until you have 5 cards, or you skip your next turn. I honestly don't know why they made it until 5 cards. Even if this card said like draw until you have 7 cards, this card would still be really bad. So I don't know what made them stop at 5, because that was not broken or even balanced by any means. It's still incredibly difficult to get into that condition, plus taking that 50% chance to possibly not skip your next turn. Because of that, this card is just so bad and should honestly never be played in any deck unless you want to lose. And that's why this card gets the #1 spot for the worst Pharaoh's Servant card. Alright, and that right there is it for the top 10 worst Pharaoh's Servant cards to be released. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you have not done so, because that definitely helps both parties. I am always looking into your feedback and recommendations in terms of what I should be doing for future videos, so hopefully you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye everyone, have a great and of course, a fantastic day.